Hey guys, what is up? Andrew from Fishing on the Fly. I'm just setting up to go out on the river right now, but I thought I'd riff a little bit about tippets, specifically tippet material. And the reason is because I'm tying on my tippet and I have an option right now. I can either go with monofilament nylon, people just call it monofilament, or fluorocarbon, which is technically monofilament fluorocarbon. Monofilament just means one filament, so like as long as it's a one filament line, technically it's mono, but bear with me. For the purposes of this discussion, monofilament nylon is just monofilament and fluorocarbon is just fluorocarbon. So, what is the difference? You'll probably, when you go to a fly shop, realize that there are two different types of spools that you can get for tippet material. There's the fluorocarbon spool and there's the monofilament spool. And the fluorocarbon spool is a lot more expensive than the mono spool. But there are some key differences here that will affect your fishing a little bit. Now, people do go back and forth with their preferences between fluoro and mono. Some people like mono, some people like mono for everything. Some people like fluoro for everything, and some people like a mix of the two for different situations. So the key differences: fluorocarbon is invisible, essentially, underwater. Monofilament is not. Monofilament's still pretty clear, but fluoro literally lets light pass right through it. That makes a big difference with stealth underwater, and when fish are really, really finicky, fluorocarbon is by far more invisible than mono, and will make a difference. It'll move the needle for you in those types of situations. So for that reason, fluorocarbon kind of wins out on its underwater visibility. Now, monofilament, on the other hand, is a floating line versus fluorocarbon, which is a sinking line. There's a little bit of debate here as to whether or not monofilament is like the go-to dry fly fishing material. You would think so, right? Because it floats and it's not going to sink your fly, versus fluorocarbon could, it sinks. But there are some people who argue that fluorocarbon, because it's so invisible, when it sinks underneath the water surface, it's more stealthy, assuming it doesn't sink your fly, assuming you're using a big enough fly, or enough fly floatant, whatever it is, right? People say that that is so invisible that it is the best option for dry fly fishing. Their argument is that because mono floats, it's going to dimple the surface in front of your fly ever so slightly. And that dimpling of the surface is less stealthy and will potentially spook fish. So that's one argument for fluoro all the time. Because fluoro definitely wins subsurface, if you ask me. But on the surface, there is a little bit of debate. I typically use mono for my surface fishing, but to be truthful, a lot of times, just if I'm already using fluoro for my underwater stuff, and I switch to a dry fly, I'm not always switching. So I go back and forth personally. I know a lot of people do. Some people are diehard one way or the other. Now, another consideration too is the stretch. Lines stretch, if you didn't know, some more than others. Monofilament has a lot of stretch. Usually monofilament, when you hook up or you get snagged, you'll feel a little bit of give on your line. Now with fluorocarbon, there's a lot less stretch. And so what that means is that you get a little bit more feel, especially with your subsurface fishing. When you're nymphing, right? If you're nymphing without an indicator, having a really good feel for what your fly is doing is really, really valuable, because you can identify those really subtle strikes. So for that reason, fluorocarbon is a little bit more tactile for your subsurface fishing. Plus it's invisible, that really helps as well. So I've kind of riffed on the two of these options. Monofilament's cheaper, it's a little bit more visible, has a little bit more stretch, so actually that means it's a little bit more forgiving too. If you're fighting a big fish and you don't want it to snap you off, fluorocarbon's gonna snap really easily. Mono will give you a little bit more forgiveness. Mono, it's a little bit thicker diameter, not a huge difference there, but it is a little bit thicker than fluoro. Fluorocarbon's more expensive, but it's super invisible. There's very little stretch, so if you can get away with having little stretch, you're really good at fighting fish or whatever, right? And you want that extra tactile feel, definitely go with fluorocarbon, especially if you're in really clear water situations and you need that invisibility. So those are my thoughts. I personally go with fluorocarbon with everything underwater. It's kind of like my everyday tippet material, but I will, if I'm having trouble, especially with really small dry flies, I will switch to a mono tippet if I'm having trouble keeping those flies afloat. So those are my thoughts. I'd love to hear what you guys think. I know there's a lot of debate back and forth on this topic, so let me know what your preferred situations are, or what your preferred line is. And as always, let me know if you have suggestions for future videos. Thank you guys, I'll see ya.